It's time for John Coggeshall, and pardon me for all seeking pardons. Parole, clemency, inmates deserving, who could be serving too much time for what they did. It's time for John Coggeshall, and pardon me for all seeking mercy. A chance to be free, we'll be learning.
Hi, everybody. John Coggeshall here. Everybody calls me Cog. And this is my Cogcast. And today we're going to talk about a deserving pardon petitioner named Mr. Coker Nick Robinson. And I'd like to read you his letter to the governor asking for a conditional pardon. And it goes like this. He says, "Dear Honorable Governor, entering adult prison as a child was unimaginable prior to the night of December 12th, 2008, when I was arrested for following some older people into a Richmond home to rob. They brought a BB gun with them. I physically hurt no one, but I was there, and it happened. During the last 12 years of my incarceration, I have examined my actions and worked hard to atone for how that robbery impacted the victims, my family, and the community in general. In prison, my first real lesson in developing into a mature young man took place in Mrs. Cousins' GED class. Now, Mrs. Cousins had a reputation as a demanding instructor. She would always declare, "To whom much is given, much is expected." And much was expected from me in her classroom. I took full advantage of that educational opportunity offered to me. I earned my GED diploma and committed myself to lifelong learning. Mrs. Cousins believed in me from the outset, even when I did not believe in myself. One day I was summoned to the regional principal's office at Powhatan Correctional Center, and I was offered a job. I was rewarded for my hard work with the keys to the classroom, a job title of academic aide, and the chance to pay it forward by helping others reach their own potential. Mrs. Cousins believed in me so much that she asked me to work beside her as a teacher's aide, and I worked directly with her for 2 years. During that time, she taught me how to be a more patient and compassionate person, especially when dealing with the disadvantaged among us. In the classroom, that meant working with inmates who had speech impediments and learning disorders, as well as prisoners who simply didn't know how to read. Mrs. Cousins taught me that being non-judgmental was key to effective teaching, because students sense when they're being judged. And to display the full range of one's teaching talents, students must trust and believe in you. For the first time, I actually had people who believed in me. Having someone believe in me just ignited my self-worth. It increased my self-esteem and confidence as a custodian of someone else's educational experience. Having someone believe in me helped me to believe I could see any task through to maturity. But there was still much more I needed to do. I earned an apprenticeship as a brick mason, and I was even chosen to serve as a mentor in a cognitive community. For starters, the cognitive community was a place where men were under construction. It was an intensive reentry unit at the Powhatan Correctional Center. Programs taught there, such as productive citizenship and thinking for a change, create an environment that stimulates good values, pro-social engagement, and civil behaviors that most people in a successful society exhibit. I was selected to be a mentor for an individualized program in that cognitive community entitled The Think Tank. I would meet regularly with my guys who ranged in affiliation from Blood to Crip to Christian to Muslim. We would discuss relevant topics about family and goals and how we plan to do things differently once released. My guys were willing to be vulnerable with each other while in session by exploring their feelings, attitudes, and beliefs concerning their own circumstances. That helped forge a community bond among us because we were able to identify a shared community despite our ideological differences. During sessions, guys learned that they had similar problems and goals. It also meant that when any of us bonded our word to something, we'd be held to it. When one's word was broken, accountability was enforced in the form of thinking check-ins and what we called image breakers. Image breakers were embarrassing sanctions like singing Old MacDonald Had a Farm or Itsy Bitsy Spider in front of everyone. Picture a hardened criminal standing up in front of other hardened criminal inmates and singing, Itsy Bitsy Spider went up the water spout. Down came the rain and washed the spider out. Anyway, it definitely helped to break the macho image some of us portrayed. In the end, it humbled yet strengthened all of us. My stint as a mentor in reentry profoundly reshaped the way I saw my responsibilities as a role model and trusted confidant. I would summon community residents whenever conflict would arise and help to create a strong atmosphere of community residents whenever conflict would arise and make everybody accountable. Sometimes when I was unable to reach a fellow inmate by listening to them, I relied on the other men in the group to help me explore respectful discourse. As a mentor, I learned that it is not just about asking or taking charge or advancing my own perspective. Being a mentor also meant I often would assume the role of student, and many diverse and at times provocative perspectives shaped my own experiences. I eventually realized I learned the most when listening to viewpoints different from my own. It was this newfound respect for listening that transformed my former impulsive and dismissive attitudes that always seemed to lead to negative and delinquent behavior on my part. One example of my using forethought to diffuse a confrontational situation was when an inmate tried to fight me because I asked to be put next in line for telephone contact. He just erupted. Y'all keep skipping me and y'all ain't gonna keep disrespecting me. That's what he said. It was clear that he too had a supportive family he wanted to talk to. I listened to his outburst while everyone in the unit watched. They probably thought I'd try and punch the guy, but I didn't. I listened. When he was done yelling, I simply asked, "Who is disrespecting you? Who is skipping you on the phone?" Turned out it wasn't me. It was people taking advantage of him in the unit. I let him know I understood that I knew what he was going through and that we as a pod would work to address and fix the problem. He apologized and I was able to use the phone without any further problem. That situation could have gone south very quickly. I really wanted to put an end to his accusations But I did not allow my feelings to push me into a tight spot. I simply heard the man out. Listening allowed me to finally hear. Before, there was often that voice in my head pulling me to do the right thing, but I'd shut it out. Listening allowed me to stop and think about what was actually being said and what wasn't being said. I could now ask myself, what is it that I'm feeling? Why do I feel this way? Then I can respond rather than react. It was an amazing game changer. I also began to emerge as a more empathetic person. I started to think more about people I harmed and how I harmed them and what I could do to fix that problem. The family that I had robbed was a family of undocumented immigrants. I began battling guilt about their situation and had to learn how to cope with it. So instead of pitying myself, I planned what I call a redemptive blueprint. I wrote down concepts that made sense to me, like raising awareness of how vulnerable our undocumented communities are, not necessarily to deportation, but to acts of violence that often go unreported. And instead of standing by, I began to build my own nonprofit community organization called Across the Aisle to implement some of my ideas and address these concerns I had. I could do this because I had become a mature man, no longer the 15-year-old wayward child. Rather than taking advantage of others for my own gain, I found a new path forward, premised on the fact that I can use my time and energy in a thoughtful, compassionate, and constructive way. Recently, I have spent a great deal of time reflecting on my current predicament and the circumstances that netted me, as a 15-year-old, a 33-year mandatory sentence in various Virginia prisons. I understand the repercussions of having committed these offenses, and I will not try to simply explain away what was done. My life before that night was teetering towards a murky place anyway. My youngest siblings, Corey and Whitney, and I did not have a solid place we could call home. At the time, we were living with my sister Nikki, while my mother stayed at another place. My mother was, in my eyes, an extraordinary person, but she too made her fair share of poor decisions. I remember when she would wet a rag and wipe my face before sending me off to school. It was very affectionate, but I also remember when she chose to leave the three of us with my sister to pursue a man who was not allowed to be around children. That really stole my innocence. I knew my siblings and I couldn't survive without basic things, and yet back when it was things that drove me, basic things like food, good clothes, and a stable home environment, one fateful night I believed I could obtain those things for us by taking someone else's property. I know now how flawed my thinking was at that time, but I could not see a different way. I was a boy making a bad man's decision. The Thinking for a Change program offered by the DOC also equipped me with tools that enabled me to think through difficult situations. One tool I acquired from that course was cognitive self-change. For example, during a routine pat-down by an officer, he grabbed my ankle, erroneously believing something was concealed there. To me, that grab was overly aggressive and inappropriate. My initial reaction was to yank my leg from the officer's hand. Of course, that would have escalated an already tense situation. So I chose not to do it. Instead, I merely raised my pants leg an inch or two to reveal there was nothing there. That incident, while minor, could have turned into a prison infraction had I chose to react differently. That's why cognitive self-change was so vital to me. It offered 3 steps. 1, pay attention to one's thinking. 2, recognize risk. And 3, practice new thinking. If only I had known that the night before I participated in that robbery. 5 minutes of one night, uninvited, into someone else's home with intent to steal, cost me over 3 decades of life behind bars. At the time of my sentencing, I did not have a clear idea of what a mandatory minimum was, or what its impact on my life would be. Even though only a BB gun was used and never brandished by me, I was sentenced to a 33-year mandatory minimum based on multiple consecutive firearms charges. I would grow old in prison. I watched my father's shocked reaction to the sentence, and the pain etched across his face. Would I ever see my dad again outside a prison visitation room? Nope. He died on July 17th, 2016, at the age of 71. It was devastating. In 2012, the Virginia Supreme Court made a groundbreaking ruling in Brown v. Commonwealth. Firearm convictions could be run concurrently with each other, all at the same time. Initially, I thought that this meant my 7 consecutive sentences for use of a firearm did not have to run one after another. Although the judge, prosecutor, and my defense attorney at the time of my sentencing believed that it did. But the Brown case allowed judges to suspend or run these sentences together, concurrently, all at the same time. This would result in a sentence much lighter than the mandatory minimum 33 years I received. I believe that this case applied to me, combined with factors like my young age and my role in the crime, could now be considered so that I might receive a second chance at life. Well, I've since learned that the Brown case only applied to cases going forward from the ruling date. Because I was sentenced 3 years before that ruling, it's my understanding I cannot seek relief in a courtroom for this. Well, that realization was devastating. It appears a governor's pardon may be my only remaining hope. So, although I may have a long road ahead of me, I travel it now with people who believe in me. Today, I have good folks who stand ready to assist with a transition from prison to society. I know that my best foot forward may not be perfect, but I know, and they all know, my effort will be. If released, I plan to work at any legitimate job to make ends meet. I plan to obtain a college degree. I'm currently enrolled as a part-time student at the Blue Ridge Community College. Classes are momentarily suspended due to COVID-19. And I have completed multiple courses at Washington and Lee University. I aim to acquire an Associate of Arts in General Studies, but once released, to obtain a mass communication major from a Virginia university. That's the ultimate goal. Well, it's become a calling. With knowledge gained from my own experiences and a solid degree in hand, I look forward to advocating for the most at-risk and underserved among us, to volunteer with organizations that share wholly constructive values. Community is a family, and each member is responsible for its nurturing. establishing a nonprofit mission that can deploy effective community resources to members who are most in need of such resources. That's helping us all help ourselves. I look forward to building relationships anew with my family. It starts by introducing them to who I've become. They must know that I am still Nick, but that Nick is not the 15-year-old boy who robbed and went to prison. And looking further into the future, should I be able to get my civil rights restored, I may run for the Richmond City 9th District City Council seat, my home district. I want to make a career out of changing lives. The change in my life happened roughly and over time. I want to help change lives through care, compassion, and commitment. Please grant me an opportunity to live as I ought to have been living prior to the terrible mistakes I made. Allow me to live as the man I am now and give to my family and society the very best that I have to offer. I respectfully ask that you consider granting me mercy. I've worked hard to earn that consideration, and I hope I have provided you with a glimpse of the man I have become today, worthy of a second chance. Sincerely, Nick Coker Robinson. I'd like to talk a minute about the history of Coker Nick Robinson, who was just a juvenile, tried as an adult. Nick was convicted in the city of Richmond in 2009. 5 counts of robbery, 1 count of attempted robbery, 1 count of burglary, and 8 counts of use of a firearm, a BB gun, in those felonies. He was 15 years old when these crimes occurred. He was supposed to be just a lookout for some older robbers. He is now serving his 13th year of a 33-year sentence for consecutive firearm charges, which, since 2012, could have been run concurrently, but aren't. His mother's partner in 2008 and 2009 was a registered sex offender, so Nick had to live with an older sister who struggled to get by with children of her own. Nick and some neighborhood friends hit upon the idea of a robbery to make some fast cash for his sister. It took less than 5 minutes. Nick's friends agreed to let him take a position around the back of a house because he wasn't feeling too good, but in reality, he was terrified. No sooner had Nick stepped to the back door when it flew open. One of his friends began handing him cash, a few wallets, and a flip phone. Nick has transformed himself by first earning his GED, then working as a teacher's aide, helping others to get their GEDs. But Nick didn't stop there. He earned an apprenticeship as a brick mason and was chosen to serve as a mentor in cognitive community. He was selected to be a mentor for an individualized program in that cognitive community entitled The Think Tank. He says, "My stint as a mentor in reentry profoundly reshaped the way I see my responsibilities as a role model and trusted confidant. Developing a new sense of empathy for people, especially for violence towards undocumented communities, Nick soon turned to developing his own nonprofit called Across the Aisle. He is also the co-founder, executive director of Universal Community Developers, UCD, a community-based nonprofit aimed at curbing juvenile delinquency by getting kids active in their community. And he's currently working on his associate's degree in business administration. Nick is deserving of a second chance. He says, "I am a mature man today compared to the wayward child I was at 15. Rather than taking advantage of others for my own gain, I found a new path forward. It is premised on the idea that I can expend my time and energy in a more thoughtful, compassionate, and constructive way. As a corrections officer assigned to Nick's unit stated, quote, "Here we had this charismatic and determined 15-year-old kid who made a huge mistake, but instead of teaching him how to be a productive member of society by treating his criminality and intense programming and therapy offered to juvenile offenders, he was thrown into a predatory adult penal system." Nick will be almost 50 years old when he's finally released. The sentence was overkill, and Nick deserves a second chance. Coker Nick Robinson humbly requests a conditional or partial pardon that reduces the very harsh prison sentence he received as a juvenile, and bases his request on genuine rehabilitation and total preparedness to re-enter society as a contributing and valued member. And I'd like to read to you a character reference letter that one of his professors at Washington and Lee University wrote, and it goes like this. It says, "Dear Governor, I'm writing to offer my very strong support for the clemency request made by Coker Nicholas Robinson. Mr. Robinson was a standout student in my spring term course earlier this year, a course offered by Washington and Lee University at the Augusta Correctional Center. Mr. Robinson impressed me as one of the most thoughtful students I have taught in more than a decade of teaching at both the University of Virginia and Washington and Lee. Mr. Robinson was enrolled in 2019 in my intensive spring term course entitled Martin Luther King Jr., Justice, Love, and Forgiveness. The course included 10 matriculated students at Washington and Lee University, together with 10 students incarcerated at the Augusta Correctional Center, all of whom received official Washington and Lee course credit for their work in the course. Mr. Coker not only received credit for the course, he also earned a well-deserved A, 4.0 in the course for his excellent essays. He is an uncommonly introspective and insightful person. As you might imagine, a course on justice, love, and forgiveness within the correctional sentence raises some very difficult questions about the importance of punishment and the importance of second chances. Mr. Robinson could always be expected to offer a penetrating insight in our conversations. It was obvious from every discussion and every essay that he has thought deeply and sincerely about his own past wrongs, his responsibilities, but also about the importance of forgiveness and mercy within a just society. Mr. Coker is uncommonly committed to responding to the needs of others. Notably, he was instrumental in drawing quieter students into the conversation, both through his encouraging words and through the excellent example of thoughtful participation his own behavior modeled. Mr. Coker had everyone in the class better, including the William and Mary matriculated students who have had many more educational opportunities than he himself ever had. Based on his superb character and performance demonstrated in my class, a class on justice and forgiveness, I urge you to consider his request for clemency. Our class was better because of Mr. Robinson, and I hope that our society will be one day soon. I strongly and humbly support his request. Sincerely, Howard Pickett, Director of the Shepherd Program for the Interdisciplinary Study of Poverty and Human Capability and Assistant Professor of Ethics and Poverty Studies. So, if you believe that Mr. Robinson deserves clemency, Share this podcast with everyone you know, and even with someone you don't know. But spread the internet word everywhere, starting today. This is John Coggeshall. Everybody calls me Cog. This is my Cogcast. Tune in again when we'll talk about another deserving pardon petitioner. Until then, thumbs up and hang loose.